There is a particular kind of loneliness that has nothing to do with being physically alone. You can be surrounded by people at a gathering, in a relationship, in a family, in a workplace full of colleagues who know your name and still feel it. The specific, disorienting sense that no one in the room is actually seeing you, that the conversations happening around you are touching the surface of something but never reaching the depth where you actually live, that the version of yourself that is present in this space is a version, a performance, a carefully maintained approximation, and that the actual you, the one beneath the performance, is somewhere else entirely, waiting for a recognition that does not seem to be coming. Carl Jung described this experience not as pathology but as initiation, not as evidence that something has gone wrong, but as the unmistakable signal that something is about to go profoundly right, if you are willing to follow where it leads. He understood that every genuine rebirth begins with dissolution, that the deep emptiness felt when there is no one left to lean on is not, as it presents itself, a crisis of abandonment. It is, in its truest nature, a sacred threshold, the specific moment in which the soul begins the long, necessary process of detaching from its dependence on the external world and discovering, for perhaps the first time, that the power it has been seeking outside itself was present within it all along. This is not comfort. Jung was not a dispenser of comfort. He was a cartographer of the genuine, and the genuine, in its most demanding forms, requires not reassurance but courage. The courage to remain with the emptiness long enough to discover what it contains. The courage to stop waiting for someone to come and lift you, and to find instead that lifting is something you are always capable of doing for yourself. Today, we explore 5 dimensions of that discovery, 5 stages in the journey from the loneliness that depletes to the solitude that empowers, 5 ways of understanding what is actually happening when life places you on a path that no one else seems to see, where no one is applauding, and where the only voice available for guidance is the one that has always been there, the one that belongs entirely and irrevocably to you. 1. Removing the masks, the dark night journey of the soul. To understand what genuine loneliness is, we must first understand what it is not. It is not simply the absence of company. Plenty of people who are physically surrounded by others experience loneliness in its most acute forms, and plenty of people who spend significant time in solitude experience nothing of the kind. The loneliness we are speaking of today is something more specific and more psychologically significant. It is the experience of spiritual disconnection, the sense of having become a stranger in environments and relationships that were once familiar, of no longer finding in the people and places that previously defined your world the resonance that made them feel like home. Called this experience the night sea journey, drawing on an ancient mythological motif that appears across cultures and centuries, in which the hero is swallowed by darkness, descends into the deep, and must find their way through the abyss before they can emerge transformed on the other side. He also described it as the dark night of the soul, a term borrowed from the mystical tradition, pointing toward the specific quality of spiritual desolation that accompanies genuine inner transformation. What characterizes this experience, in its most essential features, is the falling away of the persona, the social mask, the assembled presentation of self that we have been constructing since childhood in response to the expectations of others. The persona is not dishonesty, exactly. It is the necessary adaptation to social reality, the face we present to navigate a world that has its own requirements and its own standards for what is acceptable and what is not. But the persona is not the self, and the dark night of the soul is, among other things, the experience of the gap between them becoming undeniable. The roles that once felt natural begin to feel confining. The relationships that once felt nourishing begin to feel draining. The environments that once felt like home begin to feel like stages. And beneath all of this, beneath the discomfort and the disorientation and the grief of feeling like a stranger in your own life, there is something that Jung recognized as deeply significant: the emergence of the authentic self, pressing against the boundaries of the persona that has been containing it. The feeling that no one understands you, that particular persistent loneliness of being misread, reduced, seen only in the version that the social world requires, is not evidence that you have lost your way. It is evidence that you have grown beyond the version of yourself that those around you have come to know. The authentic self is larger, stranger, more complex, and more demanding than the persona. It does not fit comfortably within the expectations that were built around its predecessor. This misfit, this experience of no longer belonging in the spaces that once claimed you, is not failure. It is the necessary friction of genuine individuation. It is the growing pains of a self that is becoming more fully itself, at the cost of the comfortable legibility that the persona provided. Real maturity, Jung insisted, begins at exactly this point, not with the acquisition of social approval or the achievement of external markers of success, but with the willingness to be alone with your own inner voice, to sit in the discomfort of not being understood, not being seen, not being applauded, and to find that you can bear it, that, more than bearing it, you can learn from it, that the darkness of the night sea journey, navigated honestly, delivers you to a shore that you could not have reached any other way. 2. Emotional independence. Learning to comfort yourself. There is a pattern that lies at the heart of most human suffering in relation to others, and it is so pervasive, so normalized, so woven into the ordinary fabric of how we relate that most people never examine it directly. It is the pattern of using other people as mirrors, not in the metaphorical sense of learning from others or being influenced by them. These are genuine and valuable dimensions of human relationship, but in the specific psychological sense that Jung called emotional projection. The unconscious habit of looking to others to tell us who we are, of depending on their approval to feel worthy, their attention to feel significant, their presence to feel complete. When this pattern is operative, and in most people, most of the time, it is other people become the primary source of our psychological regulation. Their warmth makes us feel secure. Their withdrawal makes us feel anxious. Their praise makes us feel valuable. Their criticism makes us feel worthless. Our entire emotional weather system is organized, not around our own internal assessment of ourselves and our situation, but around the real-time feedback of the people around us. The problem with this arrangement, and it is a profound problem, one that undermines everything it touches, is that it makes your inner stability entirely contingent on something you cannot control. Other people will withdraw, sometimes without reason, sometimes for reasons that have nothing to do with you. They will be distracted, unavailable, preoccupied with their own lives. They will have bad days that produce bad behavior. They will sometimes fail you, not out of any intention to harm, but simply out of the ordinary limitations of being human. And every one of these withdrawals, in the context of emotional projection, registers as a crisis, because the mirror has looked away, and without the mirror, you cannot see yourself. Jung identified the transcendence of this pattern, what he called the central achievement of the individuation process, as the development of genuine inner authority, the capacity to be your own mirror, to provide yourself with the steadiness, the compassion, the reassurance, the honest self-assessment that you have been seeking in others, not because others are irrelevant or because genuine human connection doesn't matter, but because the foundation of your sense of self can no longer depend on their continued provision of it. This development begins, almost always, in the experience of genuine loneliness, because loneliness, the real kind, the kind that strips away the comfortable distractions and leaves you face to face with your own interior, is the condition in which the emotional projection habit becomes fully visible. When there is no one present to mirror you, the absence of the mirror reveals how completely you were depending on it. This revelation is painful, but it is also, in the most precise sense, the beginning of freedom, because what you discover, in the sustained encounter with your own interiority, that genuine solitude makes possible, is that there is someone here, that your inner world, attended to with the same quality of care and compassion that you have been directing outward, contains more than you expected. Learning to comfort yourself is not settling for less than genuine connection. It is building the foundation without which genuine connection is not actually possible, because you cannot truly connect from a position of dependency from the anxious, grasping quality of someone who needs the other person to complete them. You can only truly connect from a position of genuine inner sufficiency, from the quiet confidence of someone who chooses connection, because it enriches a life that is already whole. That sufficiency is built in solitude, in the practice of turning toward yourself, again and again, with the compassion and the patience and the honest attention that genuine self-knowledge requires. 3. Abandoning the victim ego action instead of complaint. There is a voice that becomes louder in periods of genuine difficulty, a voice that is, in its way, entirely understandable, entirely human, and entirely destructive in its effects. It is the voice that surveys the landscape of your circumstances and arrives, repeatedly and with considerable conviction, at the conclusion, "This is not fair. Why is this happening to me? Why is it so hard? Why do others have it easier? Why is my effort not recognized?" Why is my pain not seen? Why, after everything I have done and tried and endured, is this still where I am? These questions feel like legitimate grievances, because in many cases they are connected to genuine injustices and genuine difficulties. The pain behind them is real. The circumstances that prompt them are often genuinely unfair. Jung was not naive about the reality of suffering, about the genuine asymmetries of human fortune, about the fact that some people carry burdens that others do not. But he was also clear about something that the voice of complaint consistently obscures: the difference between what has happened to you and what you do with what has happened to you. The difference between your circumstances and your agency within those circumstances. The difference between the genuinely limited terrain of what you can control and the habitually underestimated breadth of what, within that terrain, remains available to you. Jung called the pattern of chronic complaint the shadow of self-pity, and he understood it as something far more insidious than simple unhappiness. It is, he recognized, a mechanism, one of the ego's most reliable strategies for maintaining the status quo while appearing to desire change, because complaint occupies the psychological space that action would otherwise fill. It provides the emotional catharsis of expression without the risk of the genuine engagement that might produce something different. Every question of the form, "Why is this happening to me?" directs energy outward toward the circumstances, the people, the universe, the unfairness of things in a way that leaves the questioner exactly where they were. It is a gesture toward the problem that produces no movement toward anything else. The reorientation that Jung's framework points toward is not the suppression of genuine grievance. It is not the forced positivity that refuses to acknowledge difficulty. It is the specific, disciplined practice of replacing the outward-directed question with an inward-directed one. Not, "Why is this happening to me?" but, "What can I do with this?" Not, "Why don't others see my value?" but, "Where am I not yet fully expressing it?" Not, "Why is this so unfair?" but, "Given that it is, what is the most powerful move available from exactly where I stand?" This reorientation does not minimize the difficulty. It does not deny the injustice. It simply redirects the energy that complaint was consuming, energy that was producing nothing, toward the only territory in which genuine change is ever produced, the territory of your own choices and your own next action. Jung understood something about the psychology of action that is worth holding carefully. He understood that action, even the smallest, most tentative, most imperfect action, sends a message to the unconscious that complaint never can. It sends the message that you are an agent in your own story, that the situation, however constrained, contains some degree of response that you are capable of making, that you are not entirely subject to what has happened, but at least partially the author of what happens next. And the unconscious responds to this message, not immediately, not dramatically, but with the quiet, accumulative shift that follows when the psyche receives, repeatedly and convincingly, evidence that its host is someone who moves rather than waits, someone who acts rather than merely endures, someone who, in the face of genuine difficulty, finds the next small thing that can be done and does it. That is how the victim ego dissolves, not through the dramatic refusal of complaint, but through the steady, incremental practice of choosing action in its place. For the trial of invisibility, becoming your own source of approval. Of all the difficulties that accompany genuine inner development, this one may be the most underestimated and the most enduring. It is the difficulty of doing your best, bringing your full effort, your genuine care, your real investment in receiving. In return, not recognition, not acknowledgement, not the confirmation that what you are doing matters and that someone has noticed. Simply silence, the invisible path, the unremarked effort, the quality that no one sees, the growth that no one applauds, the consistency that no one acknowledges, the experience of pouring yourself into something with complete sincerity and finding that the world, at least for now, at least in any visible form, does not appear to have registered it. Jung wrote something about this that is worth sitting with in its full difficulty. The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. What he was pointing toward is the specific terror of releasing the external witness as the arbiter of your value, of no longer needing someone else to confirm that what you are doing is real, that what you are feeling matters, that who you are is worthy of being seen. This release is terrifying because it requires the abandonment of one of the deepest human needs, the need to be known, to be witnessed, to have the reality of your inner life confirmed by another consciousness. We are social creatures, and the need for genuine recognition is not weakness. It is the authentic expression of our nature. But there is a form of this need that has gone beyond the legitimate desire for genuine connection and become a dependency, a structural requirement that someone, somewhere, be watching and approving, or the whole edifice of your self-worth begins to tremble. And this dependency, however understandable its origins, is a form of imprisonment, because the approval that holds the edifice up is not yours to control. It can be withdrawn at any moment, for reasons that have nothing to do with your actual value, by people who are themselves too occupied with managing their own inner worlds to see yours clearly. The development Jung is pointing toward, and it is, genuinely, among the most demanding of all psychological achievements, is the capacity to be your own witness, to observe yourself with the same quality of honest, compassionate attention that you would bring to someone you genuinely loved, to confer, for yourself and from within yourself, that the effort you are making is real, that the growth you are pursuing matters, that the person you are becoming is worthy of being. This capacity is not built in moments of external triumph. It cannot be constructed from the outside in. It is built in exactly the moments we are discussing, the invisible ones, the moments when no one is watching, the consistency that is maintained, not because it will be recognized, but because it reflects who you actually are and who you have decided to become. People who have stopped looking for their light in other people's eyes carry that light with them wherever they go. They are not dependent on the weather of others' moods and attentions for their own sense of illumination. They are, in a very precise sense, self-luminous, not in the inflated sense of someone who has overestimated their own importance, but in the genuine sense of someone who has found the source of their own light and tended it with sufficient care that it no longer requires external fuel. This is what becomes possible when you are not seen, not despite the invisibility, but because of it. Because the invisibility removes the dependency on being seen, and in the space that opens, you discover that you are always capable of seeing yourself. 5. Unshakable will. Discipline beyond emotion. We arrive at the dimension that is, in many ways, the most practical and the most immediately applicable of everything we have explored today, because everything else we have discussed, the navigation of the dark night, the development of emotional independence, the release of the victim ego, the cultivation of inner approval, all of it requires, as its vehicle, something that is often mistaken for something simpler than it is. It is called discipline, and it is worth understanding what discipline actually is, because the popular conception of it is almost entirely wrong. Discipline is widely understood as a form of self-forcing the application of willpower to overcome the resistance of a self that would rather be doing something else. In this conception, the disciplined person is someone who is constantly fighting themselves, constantly overriding their own preferences and comfort in service of some goal that is worth a sacrifice. That this conception is not entirely without truth. There are absolutely moments in the practice of genuine discipline in which you do things you do not feel like doing, in which the gap between what you are inclined toward and what your deeper values require is real and must be bridged. Jung did not pretend otherwise. But the deeper understanding of will, the one that emerges from his framework for human psychological development, is something considerably more interesting. It is not the energy of self, it is the energy of self, the specific capacity to act from your deepest values and your most genuine vision of who you are becoming, even when the temporary emotional weather of the moment is pointing in a different direction. Motivation is weather. It comes and goes, responds to circumstances, rises and falls with the rhythms of energy and mood and external conditions. There are days when the work feels alive, when the direction is clear, when the motivation is present and everything moves easily. And there are days, often the majority of days, particularly in the middle stages of any genuine undertaking, when none of that is true, when the work is difficult and the direction is unclear and the motivation has simply temporarily gone somewhere else. Will is the rudder, the mechanism that holds the course when the wind has died, not because you have forced yourself to ignore the absence of wind, but because you have developed a relationship with your own direction that is deeper than the weather of any single day, because you know where you are going, and the knowing is sufficient to keep you moving, even when the feeling of going has temporarily disappeared. This development from motivation-dependent action to will-grounded action is one of the most significant transformations available in human psychological life. It is also, not coincidentally, one of the transformations that is most directly produced by the experience of genuine loneliness and genuine solitude, because in solitude, in the absence of the external validation and social momentum that can carry you forward. When your own inner resources are insufficient, you discover whether you have this quality, whether, when there is no one watching and no one applauding and no external energy to borrow, you can still move, whether the direction you are walking in is genuinely yours, chosen from your own values and your own vision, or whether it was always dependent on others' participation for its momentum. The person who discovers, in the crucible of genuine solitude, that they can continue, that the discipline holds even when the motivation is absent, that the direction remains even when no one is confirming it, that the work goes forward even when it is invisible, that person has found something that cannot be taken away, not by circumstances, not by the withdrawal of others' support, not by the ordinary human experience of days when nothing feels possible. They have found what Jung pointed toward in all of his work, the deep, authentic, self-grounded center that is the ultimate product of genuine individuation, the place from which genuine action flows, not in response to external conditions, but in expression of internal truth. When you stop expecting understanding from the outside world, something changes in how you inhabit your own life. You become, in the most genuine sense, the center of gravity, not because you are performing strength or manufacturing magnetism, but because you have developed an actual inner center, a place from which you operate that is stable, grounded, and no longer organized around the question of whether others are noticing. This quality is, paradoxically, far more visible to others than any performance of it could be. The person who genuinely does not need to be seen radiates something that the person who desperately needs it never can, not because they are trying to, but because genuine interiority has a quality that the external world, in its own time and in its own way, tends to recognize. You become a lighthouse, not straining to be seen, not positioned for maximum visibility, not adjusting your light based on who appears to be watching, simply present, simply illuminated, simply doing what a lighthouse does, shining, consistently and without drama, from its own fixed position. And what is drawn to that light will be drawn to what the light actually is, not to the performance, not to the carefully managed presentation, but to the actual, genuine, hard-won presence of someone who has found their own source of illumination and tends it without waiting for applause. We have traveled today through 5 of the most demanding and most transformative territories available in the human psychological landscape: the dark night of the soul, in which the masks fall and the authentic self begins its emergence; the development of emotional independence, in which the mirror of others' approval is replaced by the steadier, more reliable mirror of genuine self-knowledge; the abandonment of the victim ego, in which complaint is replaced by the disciplined practice of action; the trial of invisibility, in which the need for external witness is gradually replaced by the capacity to be one's own; and the development of unshakable will, in which action becomes grounded, not in the weather of motivation, but in the bedrock of genuine self-direction. None of this is the work of a single day, a single insight, or a single conversation. It is the work of a life, specifically, the work of a life that has been willing to sit in the loneliness long enough to discover what it contains. What it contains, Jung's entire life's work suggests, is more than we expected, more than the wound, more than the emptiness, more than the absence of what we were waiting for someone else to provide. It contains the self, the actual, complete, irreducible self that was always present beneath the persona, the projection, the dependency, and the complaint, the self that was waiting, with extraordinary patience, for you to stop looking outside long enough to find it. You are on the lonely path. It is not a detour. It is not a mistake. It is not evidence that something has gone wrong with your life or your choices or your worth. It is the path, the specific, necessary, unavoidable path toward the version of yourself that could not be reached any other way. Walk it, not because it is easy, not because anyone is watching, not because the applause is coming, but because it is yours, and because the person waiting for you at the end of it, the person you are walking toward, one quiet, disciplined, unseen step at a time, is worth every difficult mile. The loneliness is not the destination, it is the door. Walk through it,